Welcome to Consider This with Big Joe Clark. Joe is a certified financial planner and adjunct assistant professor at Purdue University. Consider This is brought to you by the Financial Enhancement Group, LLC, where Joe serves as managing partner. The Financial Enhancement Group is an SEC-registered investment advisory firm based in Anderson, with offices in Anderson, Lafayette, Indianapolis, and Rensselaer, Indiana. This show is for educational purposes, and you're strongly encouraged to consult with your financial professionals for personalized guidance. Big Joe can be reached at 800-928-4001. You can find out more information about Joe and the Financial Enhancement Group at yourlifeafterwork.com. Enjoy the show, and remember to consider this.
Good morning and welcome to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I'm Sherry Cantos.
And we are happy to have you along. Hope you had an outstanding week.
Mm-hmm.
And
this week was a big one.
Hope things have been going well for you. Hard to believe that we're already near the end of February than we are to the beginning of February. 2016 just started.
I know.
And yet we are here and we are approaching that all-important April 15th date. So
some people celebrate holidays, some people.
Well, I can't say that it's necessarily a celebration, Sherry,
okay.
But it is an awareness. It's something able to be out there. And, one of the things that I share with families who come in to sit down with us, and I tell them the story of a gentleman named Dick Grasso. And Dick Grasso was about 5'3", 5'4". Got sued by Elliot Spitzer when Elliot was still in his heyday, before he did his wrongdoing. When Grasso retired from the New York Stock Exchange, which, by the way, is a not-for-profit entity,
did not know that.
He got a $100 million bonus. So Elliot Spitzer naturally sued Mr. Grasso and said, "Hey, here's the scoop, pal. Nobody can work for a not-profit and get a $100 million bonus." Grasso ended up winning in court, and Elliot, as we all know, was he kind of lost his way on the pole and got knocked off later on. But here's the scoop: I have to have a lot of data in front of me to be able to manage your money. I have to have access to what the pricing is of the individual holdings, what's going on with reports, what's going on with the technicals. I've got to have access to a whole lot of stuff. And if you go back with me in the time machine, back in 1995, if you had a 401k, Sherry, you got a statement pretty much once a year.
Yep.
Once a year. Now, there are some places that may have got them a little more often than that, but it was once a year. If you had a brokerage account, you got a statement once a quarter if you had activity. If you didn't have activity, you got it once a year. And Grasso said, hey, these people need to have the same access to data that Joe does. If they're managing their own money, if they're working with a stockbroker, or if they're doing it on their own, they need to have the same access as a fiduciary, like the Financial Enhancement Group has access to, and you've got to make it so that they've got to send their statements more often. Now, the way Wall Street gets paid, it's always the Jerry Maguire "show me the money" line, right? Yes. It's that, and you had me at hello. I kind of like both those lines, but
I like
the way the New York Stock Exchange gets paid is off of activity. They don't care if the market's up or if the market's down. Every time you buy a stock and every time you sell a stock, there is a space between those two. It's called the spread. The bid price is what they'll buy it for. The ask price is what they'll sell it for. And the average spread right now is about a penny a share. Well, back in 1995, the New York Stock Exchange averaged about 200 million shares of stock a day that they would trade. Right.
Okay.
So that, today that number, by the way, is between 2 and 3 billion shares. 2 and 3 billion shares. But remember, that's not 2 to 3 billion pennies a day. Yeah. Because if somebody bought it, somebody sold it.
Sure.
It's 4 to 6 billion pennies every single day. And the more data they can put in front of you, the better off you would do, right, Sherry? Because that's what we teach people.
Yes,
that's what more data, better.
That's right.
More,
knowledge is power.
Knowledge, one more. I can read one more thing. I will have this all worked out for absolutely for certain. So what I do is show you over the last 20 years, essentially from 1993 through 2013, there's about 35 different things that a person could actually buy and invest in. Okay. And you could have bought and held in 31 of them and outperformed the average investor at Fidelity, Vanguard, and Charles Schwab.
Wow.
There are only 3 things that you could have bought and held and done worse than what the average investor has done since that time period. More data without more wisdom does not give you any better guidance at all. This takes absolute discipline and commitment to be able to get stuff done. Makes sense. This is my my shout out for you all listening to the show. Your commitment is listening. One of your commitments. I hope you got to be doing more than just listening to my show. You actually have to do stuff. But taking the time to listen to this, to learn more about your money, to understand how Wall Street works and gets paid, to understand what the IRS is up to, these things do matter. And I congratulate you for taking the time out of your day to share a cup of coffee with me, drive around. My uncle that passed away years ago, he would love on Saturday mornings, he would just drive around in his van and listen to the show. I was, wow. Uncle Jim, you don't need to do that. But I do know some of you do, and I certainly appreciate it. If you got a question or comment, shoot me an email. Consider this at yourlifeafterwork.com. I got to take a break, but we'll be right back.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. Without tax planning during the year, that hope strategy simply won't work out. The Financial Enhancement Group can work with your CPA during the year to help minimize taxes in April by working with charitable gifting strategies, Roth conversions, and family transfers. The Financial Enhancement Group can improve your life after work. Call the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They can help you, and they welcome your call.
Good morning and welcome back to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I'm Sherry Contos.
It is always fun getting Sherry talking about her twins.
Yes.
That would be her grandchildren twins. But, yes. Because that's when her face really smiles and brightens up.
I know.
It's kind of like me talking about the IRS.
I know. You know what? That's really sad but true. Very, very, very sad.
But now, in all fairness, it's when I figure out ways to make people's situation better.
I know. So
I'm not an IRS fan.
You're motivated by helping people. That's what you're trying to say.
Very much.
That's true.
It is a chess game with the IRS, and they've got a 9-foot rule book. That's what they say it would be if they stood it on end. It's about 9 feet. And our job is to figure out how to get in that rule book and make the best decisions we possibly can. Mm-hmm. So when I learn something new, I get very, very energized and motivated. So, yes. Just for the record, I mean, and understand this, right? So this is year 28 for me in the industry, and I'm afraid if I really did the math, we're getting close to 29. Uh-huh. I started 2 weeks before the crash in '87. I'm a certified financial planner. I taught the capstone course, the senior level at Purdue in financial planning for 7 years, 14 semesters worth. So when I tell you that I've learned something new,
that's then a big
deal. My point is that there's so much out there that's why I have the East Teppan Doctor and Company that I work with on this side of the state, Huth Thompson that I work with on the west side of the state, various CPA firms down in Fishers at our Fishers office that we work with. This is a combination of having good attorneys, good CPAs, good money managers, and a planning team that's able to sit down to put stuff together to try to help people arrive at the best possible solution. Mm-hmm. So I want to walk you through this because it did impact some of the families that we serve, and
this is the new thing.
This is the new thing. Okay. So Sherry, what you need to understand when somebody says the word basis, right?
Yes.
And most of us would go to a conversation and go, "What's your basis for that thought?" Right?
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from? Uh-huh. In the financial world, when we say basis, it means what after-tax dollars did you put into the investment? So if you took $10 in your 401k and bought a mutual fund, you have no basis because you deferred paying taxes on the $10.
Okay.
If you actually put it into a Roth 401k, technically the $10 is basis. Right.
Okay.
We don't look at it that way, but it would be technically basis.
Okay.
Some people do have basis in their IRA. They contributed to non-deductible IRAs, right? So the growth is still deferred. They're going to have to pay taxes on that, but it's their job to keep track of their basis, if you will, on what's going on in the money that they put in after tax, right? This becomes very, very, very important because when I'm helping people do legacy planning, we don't call it estate planning because to me, it's more than just money. It's your values, it's your things. It's really what you want to transfer. When I help people do legacy planning, we start with their old documents and say, okay, this is pretty much what your old docs say. What's changed from your life, right? Beneficiaries who've passed away, marriages, sadly divorces, those kind of things. I look at it from a standpoint of what's changed in the tax code, right? And what's changed in the condition. And then we ask you want to continue to work with the attorney that you were working with, or do you want to work with somebody that we work with, hand in hand?
Right.
And we figure that part out. We get the attorney involved and we get the documents put together after we know clearly, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, if you will. Well, there is a thing about how this comes together. There is a thing that's called a step up in basis. And what that means is, Barb and I are married, and when we own something jointly, it is presumed that I have 50% ownership. She has 50% ownership. Unless stated otherwise, that's the way that it always is, right? Okay. So when somebody passes away, you would presume that, by the way, the step up in basis means that you don't have to pay taxes on any of the growth. That if you had basis during life of $10 and now the stock was $100, or the farm ground was now $100, or anything you can possibly imagine, you paid 10 for it. Right? Now it's $100. So you paid $10 of after-tax money. Now it's $100. You've got $90 worth of growth, right? If you sold that during your life, that $90 is going to be taxed as a capital gain. If you held it for longer than a year, it's a long-term capital gain. Less than a year, it's called a short-term capital gain. Capital gains are taxed differently than ordinary income that you would make. So it does matter, right? So if something happened to me, and the step up in basis is what, again, if you gave it away during life, you pay taxes on the $90. You die and you get a step up in basis. So the basis goes all the way up to the $100, whatever fair market value is at the date of death. All right. So if Barb and I owned 10 of those shares, right, in a joint brokerage account, technically she gets a step up in basis on half of them because I died.
Sure.
Right? At death, you get a step up. At life, you don't. So if I sell it at life, I give it away, none of that happens. Now, this becomes very, very, very important to understand. We just had a friend of one of our CPAs who had a $400,000 capital gain surprise because he had intended to buy and hold a company forever. A lot of people are out there that have done it.
Yeah.
Had a lot more than $1 million in one company. And the company went through a tax thing called an inversion, where they moved their headquarters out of the United States over to Europe. And when that did it, that they essentially bought all of his stock. And even though he wanted to keep it to get the step up basis in death, the stock was taken from him.
Wow.
And he got to pay capital gains tax on $400,000 that he didn't even know was coming. Sherry has her hand up.
I don't understand how they can make you sell.
Because it's part of the rules there. You're in a publicly traded company. Okay. So 2 weeks ago, what used to be University of Phoenix Online.
Okay.
Then it became, I believe, Apollo, announced that it was going private. Dell did it a few years ago.
So it's when you decide to go private,
or the company no longer exists. In this case, Pfizer moved overseas.
So how does that justify them forcing them to sell? That's what I don't get. They're still in business.
They went in with another business. They got bought. From an inversion standpoint. Burger King did this with a company in Canada.
Okay, I got it.
Until the United States gets its taxes in order, we're going to have this problem.
I think that's terrible.
And it's you got to get the reading, or the writing is on the wall. We just got to pay attention to it. So what did I learn new about all of this? Well, again, if we owned it jointly, how ownership works. So if you were coming in, right,
Yep.
we're going to figure out your values, your goals, your objectives. Always begin with the end in mind. God calls you home. Sherry, what do you want to have happen? Right. Make sure that we have all of that figured out. Then we're going to look at everything that you own. The way the IRS looks at your estate package, if you will, is everything that you own or have rights to. It's pretty much everything you've got. Mm-hmm. And we're going to look at your estate package, everything that you've got, and we're going to see how it's owned. So it may be owned husband and wife. It may be owned tenants in common. It may be in just your name, maybe in one type of trust, whatever. But we're going to see how it's owned. Again, if it's husband and wife, most of us, all of us that know what we're doing, would assume that the basis is 50% mine,
right,
50% Barb's.
Right.
Right. That, by the way, is true of any purchase after 1977.
Okay.
However, it is not true of purchases before 1977.
Has that always been true?
Apparently.
Wow.
Again, I said I just learned something. Quizzed a few CPAs.
Okay.
Nobody pulled us out of their. Nobody pulled us out of their hat. Nope. But the bottom line is, one of those weird things that I read on a pretty much daily basis is Farm CPA Today.
Yeah.
And you may find that odd, but that's
odd.
You read the funnies.
You're
I read.
not a lot of people that do that,
Probably not. It's all right. Just came out January 31st. I didn't have anything else to do, so I was reading it that day.
All right.
And seriously, they talk about Farmer Brown in this one, but and what happens is you go back prior to 1977. So if you bought farm ground or a stock or anything else.
Okay.
And back then, and it's a long time ago, right?
Yep.
Not really, but we'll pretend. Apparently, the males were still the dominating part of the workforce, and females were not as often in the workforce. My mom was, so I guess I would have. I thought,
my mom was too.
But regardless, when you bought something prior to 1977, your basis was really on what percentage of income that you added to the family budget.
Wow.
So
okay.
if I'm Farmer Brown and mom stays at home and takes care of the kids in the house presumably doesn't work, and I bought the farm ground off of the income that I made farming, then my basis actually gets a full 100% step up because it was all in my name.
I see.
Even though we had joint ownership.
I see.
So from an estate planning standpoint, guys, this is something very, very, very important to think about. In fact, if you've lost people in your family the last few years, you need to go back and ask that question. That's what we're working on right now. The majority of people, we've got long-standing relationships with people. So we're going back in time to be able to look at it. And there's a period of time that you can go back and amend returns that are necessary. But what's more important in this case is there are people who own property that they've had, for a long time, and they're waiting for mom to pass away before they sell it because they want a whole step up in basis.
Right.
Where the reality is they may already have the whole step up in basis and aren't going to get any more.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're just not. So need to pay attention to what's going on, how some of this stuff works. Make sure that your plan coincides with the tax return, and understand this stuff is confusing. Right. Yeah. It is not easy, light conversation for an early Saturday morning that I'm aware of. But it is one of those things that does matter. And when I find things that, I didn't know, it does excite me because it gives us ways to be able to help stuff. My buddy Ed Slott, of IRAhelp.com, I've been on Ed's board for over 10 years now. And it's, he likes to say, we know things. And indeed we do. But it's just always weird to find these little things that sneak up, or that you just flat out forget to apply.
Yeah.
Again, you have to know. Right? You have to know how to use it, and then you actually have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's the big story of the day, I suppose. Hey, you're listening to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark, along with Sherry Contos. Hope you're having an outstanding day. If you got a question or comment, shoot me an email. Consider this at yourlifeafterwork.com. Take a break and be right back.
Leaving a legacy is more than just leaving behind assets. It's leaving memories, values, and life lessons. The Financial Enhancement Group helps families work with their attorneys and their heirs to make sure everyone is on the same page and that your goals are being met. Communication, clarity, and attention to tax code changes are the keys to truly passing on what matters most. The Financial Enhancement Group can help make your wishes come first. Call the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They can help, and they welcome your call.
Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I'm Sherry Contos.
Happy to have you along. You are the most important part of the show, by the way. Does me no good to talk to myself.
That's true.
But
you do that.
I do.
Yes, you do. I've heard you.
It's part of the. It is part of the deal. It's one of those things, I suppose. But hey, the one thing that, we've got the Super Bowl over here a couple weeks ago, and, people pay attention to it. And I was talking about an indicator to somebody the other day that they had never heard of. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe if they hadn't heard about it, you guys haven't heard about it either. But rarely do you want the spotlight shown on you, especially by the media.
Yeah.
Because whenever that happens, there's normally a reversal that will take place.
Really?
So Carly Farina, who's running for president, right?
Yes.
At least as of right now.
Right now.
Who knows what's going to happen? Made the cover of Forbes as the top CEO and this wonderful heralded lady.
Yes.
Shortly thereafter, the Compaq merger and Hewlett-Packard merger were announced, and pretty much drove the company straight down the drains. The merger was evidently not the best of ideas, right? The cover of John Madden Sports. EAS, for the football game, Mike Vick, you never want to be on the cover. And that was one of the things that down in the Colts tailgate lot, I said I was worried about Freeney being on the cover, because bad things can really, really happen when you make the cover. Usually by the time the media gets it, it's already gone too far, right? Either too far or good, and they're announcing good news, and now you're due for a setback.
You're on the way down.
Or they're giving you the down in the dump story, and now it's actually time to pick and to buy. Well, I have a friend that some of you like more than others. Well, Harry Dent is a friend of mine. I've been with Harry for over 20 years. Right at probably 20 right now, and he is a demographic guru. Nobody has ever taught me any more about demographics than Harry Dent and Rodney Johnson. I've worked with them for a long time, and they've really, really, really got a good handle on it. Now, the part that Harry frustrates some of us is that he likes to prognosticate where the market's going to be, and either high or low. And, the markets just don't behave that way, in my opinion. And so I don't pay attention to where he says the market is going or heading. I do always pay attention to the demographic trends that he's taught. And kind of like me, he loves history. So we read weird things like 800-page books with no pictures called Generations. What it explains, Grandma Sherry, is why your twins may get along with you better than your daughter.
Yes.
It's why opposite, the generations just behave differently. It's very I wouldn't say it's worth reading for everybody, but very interesting stuff that's inside of said book.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's come up in Harry's research is what he calls the Great Skyscraper Indicator. And just going to give you a little bit of history. There's this big building in New York City I've been in. You've probably been in it too. It's called the Empire State Building, right? And in 1928, construction on the world's tallest building began in New York. That time it was the Bank of Manhattan. Today it's the Trump Building. But it was started in 1928. Now, for those of you who are not historians, you may recall that the Great Depression essentially started with a market crash in October of 29 and really, really went downhill from there, right? 33, 34, just bad periods of time. When its developers, back to the Manhattan Trust Building, When its developers learned that the Chrysler building would be even taller, they added 3 more stories to the Manhattan building to secure a title of the world's tallest. Then the Chrysler building came along and added a giant spire, beating it just by over 100 feet. Of course, that didn't last long either. Each of these buildings held the title for less than a year before the Empire State Building topped out at 1,454 feet, more than 400 feet taller than the other 2. And in case you missed it, that's when the economy collapsed. It is no coincidence in both cases. The construction of major buildings coincided with long-term economic peaks. Right? When you've got extra money to show off, you show off, right? Yeah. It happened in the 30s. It happened again in the 1970s.
Makes sense.
The Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat expects, get a load of this, 135 skyscrapers to be finished in 2016.
Really?
And another 440 of them in 2017.
Really?
Really. And get this. The council says the number of super tall skyscrapers, those would be 300 meters or higher, has doubled from 50 in 2010 to 100 in 2015. Just 5 years in the most artificial global bubble in human history. Now, China has plans to complete another project in 2017. This one's called the Phoenix Towers. And it's in south central China. The tallest will be the first ever to stand 1 kilometer, or 3,280 feet. Oh, yes, and it's going to be pink.
Oh, my.
China's not the only one in the current race. Saudi Arabia has their own 3,280-foot Kingdom Tower. And just as the oil has been crashing and they've been falling down, and now they're going to go build one. And it's just interesting to see these.
So why are they doing it if everything's crashing? I don't get it.
Because you don't build a skyscraper overnight.
So
right?
they've been planning it all during
They've been planning it during this economic boom. Right?
Okay.
And interesting history, and we'll be done with the skyscraper part. Even though the building opened in 1931, the Empire State Building did not become profitable till the 1950s. For a while, they actually called it the Empty State Building, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. Now, here's the deal. When you start having excess money in a system, it will show up somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And we've been doing the show for over a year together now, so you've seen parts of this, but the money just goes in the different paths. The concept behind QE, quantitative easing, was to put money into the system because they thought you would spend it. Right.
Yes. Okay.
And, my argument and what happened, by the way, we were right, just so you know, is that just because you got more money because interest rates were low didn't mean that you would spend more money as a baby boomer.
Right.
Now, would my children at 19 and 23? Yes. Would my younger employees at 25 who are starting families and buying houses? Yes. Do they have as much disposable income as the average baby boomer? No. Right. And so they put money into the system. More of it went toward us than it went toward them, and we didn't need more things. Right. So money went to other things. Money went to things like collectibles. Some art things went up much more expensive than they were before. Fly fishing poles, Miss Sherry, that you went out and acquired.
Stuff.
It's hobby stuff.
Yeah.
It's all about the needs of our grandkids, or what we perceive to be, and our wants. Right, we really don't care about our kids at this point. It's show me the babies, right? And they somehow or another have an unlimited budget.
Yes, they do.
And I'm not sure how that works, but it is what it is. So these countries decided that they were going to build these things. They had good economic times, and they started putting the money into the system. Going back to the premise we started with, right, with not being on the cover of a magazine. Barb doesn't get the humor in this, but there's a show on TV it's called Blood and Oil, I believe it is. But it is about the Bakken fields. And this, Don Johnson, remember Miami Vice? Yeah. Don Johnson plays the star of this somewhat crooked oil guy, and the billions of dollars that they've made in the oil field. And that movie that show just started this year, right in the middle of the crashing of energy prices. Yeah. But you don't make a movie overnight. They didn't come up with a script. You had people making 6 figures a year, living in their cars and trucks, because there were not enough houses in the Bakken fields to be able to take care of it. They were paying $15 to $18 an hour to work at McDonald's. So when you have excess capital, you begin to have money go into areas that it wouldn't normally go to, right? You probably wouldn't try to build a skyscraper a mile in the sky if you were going to try to do the best use of capital. Right. But when you've got excess money, right, whether it's artificial or not artificial, doesn't matter, right? All bubbles tend to have certain things that indicate, hey, it's time to slow down and take a breath. Right.
Okay.
And you never know when that day is going to occur. Right. You have to look for the signs. And so when Harry does his stuff demographically, he looks at it and says, okay, this is demographically when we should start to slow down. And in all fairness, nobody I've met knows more about demographics than he does. So I'm kind of with him.
So what's he saying now?
Well, he doesn't like where the market is, but he hadn't liked where the market was, for a long time.
Sure. Okay.
That's why we don't talk about where he thinks the market is.
Yeah,
we talk about where the demographics are,
right,
which you've heard on this show for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
We've got more people over 65 than under 14.
Yep.
Right. We've got a quarter of the GDP of the world coming from countries that are in negative interest rates, right? And they're negative so that they would, with the hope that you would take that money and put it to work somewhere else, right? Yeah. Either spend it or invest it in something else. Yeah. We're in a natural deflationary, not inflationary state. And though those of us who lived through the 1980s say, inflation's bad, most of us now really want it. I mean, we want our house to go up more in value, right? Right. We don't want things going down in value. We don't want negative interest rates. We don't want that. But it is the deal that we have, and we've got to be willing to pay attention to it. So again, as you invest capital, right? I hear people all the time say, Joe, the market goes up, the market goes down, it always comes back. Well, it does. Historically, it has always come back. It's just most of us are not willing to wait the 5 to 10 years that sometimes it has taken to come back. Yeah. It was the 1950s before the Dow got back to where it was in the crash. Most people do not want to wait.
Most people can't.
Yes, you don't want to wait that long.
Right.
And so when we sit down and we look at people's portfolios, what we're trying to do is find things that make sure, based on our risk barometer, that they've got the right percentage of exposure, but that they're also in the right places, that that money is properly being taken care of. And it is worth a conversation, folks. Sure. It's also worth getting signed up for the Market Carver. Every week, we have the allocation meeting on Monday. Either myself or Adam, the chief investment strategist, will send out a 3 to 5 minute video clip. You get it at about 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoons, and it will tell you these are the things that we think are the most important, that are going on in the economic world right now. Unlike this show, the radio show, which is not headline driven.
Well, I was going to say that's maybe the only place you're going to get that information, because we're not going to talk about it here.
Yeah, well, and it's because things change so quickly, right? Yeah. But yes, and that's what that's designed for us. Here's the update of what's going on inside of the market, inside of the economy. Here is why it matters.
And you sometimes cover that information in your newspaper article too.
Every now and then,
Herald Bulletin. Go into detail on one certain thing. Right. So that's a good thing. That's on the website if people want to check that out. Yep.
It's back there at yourlifeafterwork.com. So back to China real quick, because that is one of the stories that, that's driving a lot of this, right? China is essentially functioning now with 20% of their GDP. They have the equivalent of 20% of their GDP in debt, right? Compared to the United States, which is about 12. Wow. Right? And we worry about debt over here all the time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So they are really, really strapped when you got 20% of what's coming in gone to service debt. And when you talk about skyscrapers like this, they have taken on a lot more debt to build those things, to put them up into the middle of the sky. Yep. So just as I should say, buyer beware. Hey, you're listening to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark, along with Sherry Contos. If you got a question or comment, shoot us an email. Consider this at yourlifeafterwork.com. I got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Leaving a legacy is more than just leaving behind assets. It's leaving memories, values, and life lessons. The Financial Enhancement Group helps families work with their attorneys and their heirs to make sure everyone is on the same page and that your goals are being met. Communication, clarity, and attention to tax code changes are the keys to truly passing on what matters most. The Financial Enhancement Group can help make your wishes come first. Call the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They can help, and they welcome your call.
Well, good morning and welcome to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I'm Sherry Cantos.
We're really happy to have you along. And if you're wondering why in the world I keep saying good morning, it's because when we record the show, it is morning.
That's true.
But if you're listening on Wilo Thursday afternoon, 4 to 5,
yeah.
Happy afternoon. Drive safely.
Yeah.
All right. Things are good. Sherry, have you ever wanted something and then got it and then kind of weren't so sure you wanted it after all?
I don't know that that's happened to me a whole lot, actually.
Doesn't happen to me a whole lot either. But
yeah,
I'm kind of I'm as I read this, I'm a little bit kind of, I'm a little older, a little wiser now.
Really?
And yeah.
I'm
So
ready to hear this.
All right. So there are deals in the marketplace, and you'll hear them that are called private or public deals.
Okay.
Right. Public deals are like mutual funds. Right. Individual equities that are publicly traded.
Yep.
Publicly means it's not controlled by a small group of people, and anybody who has the money can invest in the deal.
Okay.
Okay. Then there are private deals, like, the Financial Enhancement Group's got 4 owners, but we're privately held. You can't show up and say, Joe, I want to see your books. Yeah. You can't say, Joe, I want to buy 5% of your company.
Yeah.
You can say that. You're just not going to get an answer that you're probably wanting, right?
Sure.
Those are private deals. Well, every now and then, you will have a company that wants to raise capital.
Sure.
But doesn't want to go through all of the regulations and everything else that would be required to become publicly traded.
Okay.
Maybe they don't want to be publicly traded at all, or maybe they're startup company. So last year, the big news, and I'm sure that's what perpetuated the story, the big news last year is we had over 100 unicorns. And unicorns were companies that had been in business for less than 10 years that had a market capitalization of more than $1 billion. These were private companies that had raised capital and were now thinking about going public. Right? Okay. And if you ever hear anybody talk about a Reg D investment, Regulation D is an investment where you're able to put money in, but it's not publicly traded. Number one risk, obviously, is liquidity, right? Yeah. You can't get the money back out very easily. But there's a whole slew of risks, right? Sure. When there's less regulation, there's more opportunities for scams, cons, everything else, whether or not the money can be handled, those kind of issues that exist outside of there, right? Now, accreditation is what you have to be able to invest in one of those Reg D placements. Accredited is what we call it. It's an accreditation. Totally in the past, based on resources. You had to make more than $200,000 a year, for instance, 3 of the last 5 years, $300 if you're married, or you had to have $1 million worth of net worth, excluding your home, and technically not even your retirement accounts were supposed to count. Okay.
Okay.
And I always made the argument, said, hey, guys, now this is a little unfair. You got somebody in Madison County, Indiana, making $150,000 a year. They're technically not accredited, but they're probably doing pretty well for themselves. Oh, yeah. Somebody in LA making $250,000 a year is they're eating beans and Wheaties and, trying to figure out how to survive.
Right. Yeah.
But they're accredited and the guy here is not. I said, we need to create a fairer standard because there are business opportunities that are out there that some people need to be able to invest in. Well, as we started off the discussion, Congress listened.
Really?
And
there's a story right there.
Well, yeah, no kidding. Worse than that, 347 to 8. That was I mean, you talk about not being any no fight at all. 347 to 8 would expand the definition of accredited investor. Under current rules, a person had to have a net worth of $1 million or make $200,000 or more annually. The legislation would allow anyone now who has a securities license.
Okay.
Right. So we've got clients that have securities licenses, by the way.
Sure.
I manage the money, but they have securities license.
I get it. I hear the irony.
Having a securities license doesn't make you a guru in the financial world.
Sure.
If you see somebody who says they have a Series 6 or a Series 7, or that means they passed a test. Right. That does not mean they understand, what we do on a daily basis. It just means they passed a test. So that part scares me, right? Or who has professional knowledge and experience related to a specific security to participate in the private placement. The later description would apply. For instance, the author says, this scares me to death, the doctor who wants to invest in a medical device manufacturing startup. Okay. Now, does the doc understand medical devices more than me?
Sure.
Most likely, right? Is he going to understand more than most of the people who are putting money into the deal? And the answer is most likely, right? Does that mean that the doc has the necessary experience to determine whether or not the business is being ran correctly?
No.
Whether or not yes, it's a great device. Maybe they're selling like hotcakes, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to do the rest.
Right.
And it's, so I'm mixed on this. Do I think the rule over the $1 million should be changed? Yes. Do I think the doctor understands the medical device issue? Yes. So I'm kind of in the middle of the road. The vote certainly wouldn't have been 347 to 8. When I look at this, I'm a little further away from that. Than what's going on.
It was so unanimous.
And so, what concerns me is you're only allowed to have a certain number of people that invest in a Reg D account, or if you will. You're allowed to have a certain number that aren't accredited. Yeah. And everybody else has to be accredited.
Right.
And so Sherry, you could invest in a grant writing company. If I wasn't accredited, I couldn't. Right?
Okay, yeah.
But does that mean that if you sit down and you explain to me the grant rating process, gave me a few books, put me on a board somewhere, that I couldn't now argue that, well, I have, who is going to regulate what I know and what I don't know, and whether this is really a good idea for me or not. All right.
So this must be about trying to expand business opportunities or expand.
I think it came. I'm sure it came from the unicorn deal last year.
Okay.
Where, mom and pops,
right,
or people who had a little bit of resources were hearing about these companies, people getting rich. Why can't I get in? Yeah. Well, you're not accredited. What do you mean I'm not accredited?
Right.
Because I learned to live on nothing and save my pennies.
That means
I don't count.
In the Midwest, and so my net worth might not be this. My
doesn't need to be as high.
Doesn't need to be as high. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, it's a very interesting conversation in terms of what's going on. Here's my point, however, that I want you to keep in mind. Remember the fiduciary focus, and if you missed it, you can get segments off of the internet or iTunes anytime you want to go backwards. Yep. Our show is on yourlifeafterwork.com. That's our website for the Financial Enhancement Group. You can go there, and anytime you see the fiduciary focus, I'm going to be talking about these 4 things: risk and volatility, fees and expenses, taxes both today and tomorrow, and real return. Those are the 4 things that, as a fiduciary, I think you have to pay attention to. And I don't believe the majority of people truly understand the risk of illiquidity. Right? Can't get my money back.
Until they need to, then they understand the risk.
Well, but the number of sales that I'm seeing in indexed equity annuities right now, and there's a proliferation that's taking place.
Interesting.
And the lockup. This poor lady came to us 2 weeks ago, and lots of kids, and sit down, and it really didn't understand her money at all, but was sent to this guy and down in Indianapolis, and went down, and essentially he had locked all of her money up in about 5 different annuity programs. She asked how much she could take out. Or he asked, how much do you need? She said it, and he said, we can do that. So set it up. She got income for 9 years, and then all of a sudden one day the check didn't come. And she didn't understand that the contract ran out of money. So we had to work with her to help her take about a 40% reduction in income. And so that she would still be able to have enough money to be able to go. Just because you have a license, does not mean you have integrity.
No.
It doesn't mean that you know how to do planning, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, when I look at that fiduciary focus and I look at this rule, there are a lot of people out there that will come to me to try to get me to put my clients in things that shouldn't even be allowed to exist. The businesses aren't that well thought out. They don't have the right people being able to run them. And everybody gets caught up in periods of time where the economics looks really, really strong.
Right.
And that's what it looked like last year in the internet, or in the technology space. And a big part of it's this biotech stuff. The example they use in that medical device, right? And I understand when a doc says, "Hey, I want to be able to invest." I get the point. I just worry about it overall. So anytime somebody approaches you with something where liquidity is an issue, remember that is part of that risk and volatility thing.
Sure.
And you really want to think that through. And it's, we're more than willing to have a cup of coffee with you, sit down and discuss what that really means and how it looks inside of your future. Very, very, very important to do. So, hey, you're listening to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark. I got to take a break. You got a question or comment, shoot me an email. Consider this at yourlifeafterwork.com. We'll be right back.
Buying investments can be fun and exciting, but selling them is almost always painful. You either have to recognize a mistake or pay taxes on a gain, and neither is pleasant. If you're tired of worrying about your money, consider calling the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They're registered investment advisors, and they'll help you not only document your investment strategy, but also oversee the tough choices and decisions. Call the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They're here to help.
Good morning and welcome back to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I'm Sherry Cantos.
Happy to have you along. And yes, Sherry, liquidity is a huge issue. One of the things, and if you're getting near that age 70 and a half, that's the magic period of time where you have to take required minimum distributions out of your IRAs, your 401ks, your 403bs. Please pay attention to this. There are people in the world who do things that they just flat out shouldn't do. And we had an issue just not too recently. Kids brought their parents' stuff in. Didn't think that mom and dad necessarily were paying attention to it as much as they should have, and continued to, in their mind, seem to be buying things from a broker. And sure enough, there was an annuity that one of those index equity annuities you hear me talk about, 15-year surrender period on the contract, Sherry. 15 years, money's tied up.
Wow.
Said you can get 10% out a year, but if you don't take it out of the year, it's still only 10% the next year. And when I went through the file, they had actually charged an 8% sales surrender fee on the contract that they moved that one into.
Oh my God.
So they lost 8% on that, had to have their money tied up for 15 years.
Wow.
That creates a huge, huge problem that you've got to be aware of. But here's what really took the cake. All of the IRA was put into a non-traded REIT. So REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. It buys property. Okay. Older people tend to think that property is safe and stable, right? And it may very well be maybe something better for them to have been in the market, possibly. I can't go there.
Sure.
What I can tell you is this: when you put money in a non-publicly traded instrument, and they have the best of intentions, quote unquote. You can't see my air quotes.
Yeah.
The best of the intentions to be able to give people money for the required minimum distributions. If the program doesn't have enough cash,
they
can't.
Yeah.
And so in this particular situation, here's this poor guy, 73 or 74 years old. The company distributes shares out, right, to make up for the required minimum distribution. So the IRS, otherwise the penalty of missing an RMD is 50%.
Okay.
So the company distributes shares. The shares have to then go into another type of an account. You can't liquidate them. You just still own the shares, but you have to pay the taxes on them. So not only did the poor guy at 73 years old not get his income, but he had to pay taxes on his income that he didn't get because a broker thought that they needed a sales commission. Wow. Just genius. So
was there any way to get out of that for this guy?
No.
So he's stuck.
No, he's stuck. The program will eventually unwind and sell itself out. But that's why you really have to pay attention to liquidity and really, really ask questions. Man. The big thing that the Obama administration is one of the things that he's pushing for, Department of Labor, the SEC, is all this that everybody needs to have somebody who's providing competent and impartial guidance. So I've got a feeling if the guy laid the 7% commission down to it and said, and when you put your $100,000 in here, by the way, I'm getting a $7,000 check, the gentleman might have said, maybe there's something wrong with part of this deal, right? So always ask, where, how the compensation part works, what's going on. But anyhow, one of the groups that I've been involved with for a long time is Ed Slott. Ed is the IRA guru. You may have seen him on PBS. Yep. He's raised more money in his shows for PBS than anybody else in the history of PBS. Yeah. So it's all about retirement and as it relates to tax. So, we always put out this top 10 retirement facts for the month. So the top 10 for January, just kind of humor. So we won't spend a lot of time on each of these. And this is precisely why in President Obama's final budget proposal, you're going to see a number of provisions aimed at increasing employees' participation in the workplace retirement plans. Now we begin the quotation. Only about half of workers participate in workplace retirement savings plans, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. About half. So it's about 54% when you go in and you look at the numbers. Again, if you're listening to this, if you're in the lower marginal tax brackets, the 10 or 15% bracket, and your employer does not have a Roth option, in my opinion, you put in the amount of money up to what they match. Yes. And you use the remainder of the money inside of a Roth IRA, not the 401k. It takes a little discipline, a little more time, but you want to make sure that you're getting in the right tax perspective. Sure. I wouldn't say we should have more than half the people participate, but not everybody who is participating in a 401k plan, in all fairness, should be. 2, knowledgeable professionals should be able to help you understand the rules. Yes. The new data, part of John Hancock's 2015 Financial Stress Survey, shows that people surveyed, 70% of those who work with an advisor are on track or ahead in saving for retirement versus 33% who are doing it on their own. Enough said.
That's pretty significant.
Enough said. Yeah. Studies show that marriage is not only good for your health, but also your wealth. I think we talked about that last week. Yeah,
we did.
Mean reported post-retirement income is twice as high for couples as singles. Maybe that's because there's 2 incomes. I don't know.
That's true.
Mean reported financial wealth, including IRAs, is 3 times as much for couples as singles. There's just this thing in finance called efficiency.
Yeah.
I talked about the lady, that was by herself and had her house, and I said, dear, if you were married, bottom line is, even if he had no income, your marginal bracket would drop because of the way deductions work and how much you can make as a marginal person. It would save you about $10,000 a year just to get married, even if the guy had no income. Right? And, so it's just things to think about. You got to think out of the box. I'm not trying to be a Cupid here.
Sure, yeah.
Valentine's Day is past. Most 40 to 55-year-olds are way behind in their retirement savings schedule, and they're not alone. According to the National Institute of Retirement Security, Americans between the ages of 40 and 55, that's me, have retirement savings of $14,500, and they estimate they're going to need 20 to 30 times that amount of money. Again, I think that average is where you get into trouble. The reality is you've got people who have a lot more and you've got people who have none, right? None. One of the things that I would advise inside of that category or that column is please make sure you don't have orphan money laying around. You leave a job, you go to another job, it's only $2,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 in the 401k. And so people do nothing with it. They pay attention to where the $100,000 is. That orphan money adds up, my friends. And one of the things that, Kelsey or Heather or Taylor or April will help you do here, our paraplanning team, is we do all of that hard work for you. You get the forms, we make all of the transfers and get it into the accounts where it belongs. So we make sure the taxation is able to be controlled. You don't pay a lot of extra tax and that the money is set up and works, as it should for your benefit. Don't let orphans sit out there and not be taken care of. Number 6, as a country and global population, we're going to have to come up with new and creative ways of managing our growing population of retirees. In 1950, when world population was much younger, with a median age of 23, the global potential support ratio was about 12 people working for one person age 65 or older. Today, that number has declined to 8. And by the year 2050, it's projected to decline to 4.
That's amazing.
And that, my friends, is worldwide and obviously very, 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 very problematic.
Yeah.
And just, the
answer, Joe,
the demographics.
Have to come up with
I will tell you, we talk about fighting for natural resources, and people talk that about being oil. I'm telling you, it's people.
Yes.
And if Washington doesn't figure out its immigration policy so that we can get people who want to come here to work, we have a problem. And I don't want to get on a political soapbox about that, but both parties are really flawed, inside of this. Just because somebody shows up to work doesn't mean that they need to be in Social Security and get free health and everything else.
Right.
And when somebody comes here and we agree to educate them and then kick them out, which I have seen happen, why? Well, that makes no sense either, right? And you've got to somehow or another, those two sides have to come together. But that is really, really the answer. And we've got to figure out how to maintain a world where the productivity occurs.
Yeah.
Now, we talked last week, got a question on this, on the catch-up provision. And the catch-up provision exists both with the IRA and with the 401ks and 403bs. And essentially, everybody who works, who has income, is allowed to put $18,000 into their 401k at any age. But if you're over 50, you can catch up, presuming that you didn't have money put in along the way. You can catch up and add another $6,000 a year, so you can put in $24,000. If you have an IRA and you qualify for a deductible IRA, because that depends on a lot of other stuff. But if you're at any age, you can put in $5,500 if you have earned income and you qualify. If you're over 50, you can put in $6,500 a year. That's the catch up. So the question was, Joe, can I do a catch up in the 401k and the IRA? The answer is if you qualify to be able to put it in a Roth or a deductible IRA, then absolutely you can use the catch in both places, right? Okay. The catch up provision in both places. It's not just a one or standalone deal. So, hey, if you got more questions like that, keep them coming. Email me, consider this at yourlifeafterwork.com. If there's anything at all we can do to be of service to help you understand your money better, we're always more than happy to have that conversation. I got to take a break. We'll be right back.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. Without tax planning during the year, that hope strategy simply won't work out. The Financial Enhancement Group can work with your CPA during the year to help minimize taxes in April by working with charitable gifting strategies, Roth conversions, and family transfers. The Financial Enhancement Group can improve your life after work. Call the Financial Enhancement Group at 800-928-4001. They can help you, and they welcome your call.
Good morning and welcome back to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark.
I am Sherry Contos.
Hope you've had a wonderful most of February. Hard to believe this thing is really coming to a wrap.
I really, but I'm happy though. I'm happy.
It really is. And thanks for the nice words. I was able to be on Wish TV a couple weeks ago talking about Valentine's Day and relationships and how money works with your stocks. And, I know Valentine's Day is over, but just please keep in mind, you have relationships with people. not with companies. And so what I see happen so often is people work so hard saving for their retirement. They're saving share because they want to have a better future, right? I'm saving so that I have this better future. And all of a sudden, the kids grow up and they leave, and the statement comes, and you sit down and you look at it, and you finally hit that number. And for some of us, it's 100,000. For some of us, it's 1 million, somewhere in between, but it's a number. And that statement moves from being your financial future to the newest family member. I mean, if you could invite it to Thanksgiving, you would. And you might be talking about it at Thanksgiving. And our identities get tied up into it, and we forget that main purpose. And so, that was the big thing that I talked about on Wish TV, is just making sure that we keep that under control, understanding that it is a tool to be able to drive our future so that we can have a better retirement, to not spend with fear, but to make sure that we're paying attention to the taxes, the everything else, and understand it's a tool. We had that blessing to be able to save and accumulate money, and now you're going to figure out the best way to distribute it in the best possible tax situation. It is okay, my friends. That is why you saved it.
That's right.
Hey, you've been listening to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark, along with Sherry Contos. I hope you've had an outstanding hour on the show with us. It's what I like to call the fastest hour in radio.
Sure goes fast to listen.
It does. God bless. Have a great week. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks for listening to Consider This with Big Joe Clark. Big Joe can be reached at 800-928-4001 or via email at bigjoe@yourlifeafterwork.com. The Financial Enhancement Group is located at 429 East 14th Street, Anderson, Indiana, 46016. Be sure to check out their website for more information at yourlifeafterwork.com. Have a great week, and don't forget to consider this.